Well, you're right. I mean, I have a personal experience in my own case, but also from others that I help, mostly obviously in the UAE and the Gulf. In my own case, back in 2014, I was effectively tricked to go to Dubai by former employers and effectively locked up for 22 months. 9 months of that was for so-called Twitter abuse, of which I was acquitted. And in that 22 months saw horrors that you can't imagine. I was seriously abused, tortured, sexually assaulted, and all that's been found by an English court. And also in my case, as happens all across the UAE and other countries, was forced to sign a document, which I assume was a confession in Arabic, which I didn't understand. And that's something now that, focusing on the UAE again, every person that we hear, you see every story about a Brit getting in trouble in the UAE or somewhere in the Gulf. That's the very first step. They're forced this document, sign this, sign this. Most people don't speak Arabic. They don't know what it means. They sign it thinking, we want to go home. We want to leave. So it's something that's very common in countries like that, like Iran, like the UAE, the Gulf countries, etc. And we can see in this case, in the case of Nazanin, it's effectively where she's been used as a political pawn. We also saw it in the case of Matthew Hedges, someone else, a young British student, if you remember, a few years back, who was accused of spying by the UAE and forced to sign a false confession as well.
I suppose, is this, I don't want to sound glib, but is this the biggest issue? If signing something that you don't understand, in a language you don't understand, is your ticket out of prison, why wouldn't you necessarily sign it? Is it a matter of honour? I mean, I think I'd probably sign a false confession if it meant that I could return to my country free, even if it meant that I didn't return to the Middle East.
Well, I agree with you. I think, it's certainly in my case and in other cases where they've got no links to that country that they're trying to leave from, then obviously, the decision is get home as quickly as possible, provided that you're not leaving anyone behind. But in the case of Nazanin and in the case of others, they obviously have family in Iran, and that confession can be used against them to obviously cause pressure to her. And that's something that if you read I don't know if you've read the letter that was sent by her lawyers at Redress, that's I think one of the concerns, that those so-called confessions can be used against the people that have done them. Of course, if you've got no connection to the country, you want to leave, get home safe, and most people, although annoyed by signing something like that, would rather be home. But it does have ramifications, even if you don't have any links back to that country. If she's effectively agreed, signed a confession saying she committed, as far as Iran is concerned, a serious criminal offence, that's something that will stay with her potentially forever when she travels.
And of course, it wasn't just the so-called false confession that Nazanin signed, but also British taxpayers who handed over quite an extraordinary amount of money to the Iranian regime. Are we going to really, for the next few months, be looking over all of the aspects of this case, a British state scrambling to get Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe freed, and potentially making maybe what some might describe as some errors in the process?
Well, exactly. I think, that's something that, I spoke about this before at the time when Nazanin was released, and the timing was very coincidental or convenient when we looked at the fact that Russia was basically stopping, we were not able to get oil and energy from Russia anymore. So we now needed to start to look to countries like Iran, to other countries, the UAE and Saudi, and we saw Boris Johnson doing a tour of all these Middle Eastern dictators with oil. So the timing, I think, was perhaps not coincidental, but certainly there seems to have been a mad rush to get her back no matter what. And it would be interesting to see the real reasoning behind that. But it's not just Nazanin that is at issue here. The Foreign Office really, I've said it before, is not fit for purpose when it comes to protecting Brits abroad. And in Nazanin's letter, but also generally, there needs to be a reform and an investigation of not just what's happened to Nazanin, but an investigation of what is the role of the Foreign Office when it comes to protecting Brits abroad. Are they fit for purpose, and are they performing that role? Because this is something that the work that I now do in helping victims of injustice, we see again and again and again and again. And it's something that needs to change, because otherwise there'll be another Nazanin, there'll be another Matthew Hedges, and it will carry on. There's lots of ways that they could actually consider improving this. But one of, I think, the main issues is that you've got a fundamental conflict of interest in the Foreign Office when it comes to protecting an individual Brit that has got into some issues in the country that they may be in, whether it's a traveller or an expat, plus then the investment that the Foreign Office is looking at from that country or into that country. There's two conflicting issues there.
Yeah, and her lawyers, I believe, have asked the Foreign Office to review its policies on that, torture policies, essentially, and their implementation. So we will keep an eye on what happens with that. I just want to finish finally with, because you are somebody who, as you've just explained, has some personal experience in being captured, essentially, and tortured. Nazanin's lawyers have said she's obviously suffering chronic post-traumatic stress disorder, major depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder. Can you ever really recover from something like this, mentally? Because it's unthinkable for the vast majority of us what she would have had to go through.
I think talking about my own personal experience, I came back in 2016 after the 9 months of being jailed for Twitter abuse. And since then, I've spent about in and out of hospital having treatment that's called EMDR, which helps with post-traumatic stress disorder, probably about 9 months as an inpatient in hospital in those years. And that was exacerbated, as some of your viewers might know, I was also hacked with Pegasus by the UAE, which obviously also causes some mental issues when you're very concerned and paranoid. But it's something that I think certainly for a very long time is going to stay with her. And you're always looking over your shoulder. You're always concerned, always worried. And I'm sure that's something even more so in her case because she has family there and friends there.